I'm on a mission in search of culture and cookies. Join me as I travel the country to learn about my family and an iconic dessert of Jewish cuisine, the Rugelach. Wanting to discover more about my family history, I head to Detroit International Airport to catch a flight to the land of our Jewish ancestors, Sarasota, Florida. Once I arrive, I pay a quick visit to some of the local wildlife. After that, I decide to meet up with my brother to provide some historical context for my journey.
Our father is an Ashkenazi Jew, and most of his great-grandparents came in a major immigration wave, and between like the 1870s and the 1910s, this is when so many immigrants were coming to America from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. Even though they assimilated, they brought their traditions too. And so us generations later, we get both of that. We get the traditions that survive, but we also get, the American assimilation. It's pretty interesting.
After talking to my brother for a while, I realize we have a lot in common. We even have the same parents and childhood home. The next step on my quest would be to visit my grandmother, an excellent cook who taught me how to make rugelach years ago.
My family was good cooks, every one of them. There were restaurants, there were meat markets, there were kosher markets. My grandmother was such a good cook. My mother was such a good cook, and it was inevitable. I became a cook too. My maternal grandparents, who came to live with my mother when my father was at war in the Second World War. My grandmother had 9 or 10 siblings that survived, and she was the oldest girl, and it's possible that she was cooking from a very young age. She told me that when I was weaned from mother's milk, I was weaned on a pickle, a kosher dill pickle. It's probably true, because I have the taste in my mouth always of memories of good food. My grandparents came to live with me in 1943 when my father went off to war in Germany. I think that my grandmother cooked from that very day for me, and I thought it was the greatest. Still do.
Who taught you how to cook rugelach?
My grandmother. My mother was a little bit afraid of pastry. My grandmother was not afraid of anything that you could eat, and she gave me the same courage. Oh, I probably had rugelach before I could say the word. Well, I certainly remember that there were many fillings when you make rugelach. The memory is all clouded together and sweetened up with chopped nuts and sometimes raisins, and if you didn't have raisins, it was during the war. If you didn't have raisins, you didn't get raisins. Nuts and jam and whatever little bits and pieces, even little pieces of leftover rugelach would go into the filling. Teaching other generations to cook, no matter what culture you came from, for me is keeping the memory of our ancestry alive. The modern way of making things is not the same as before, and they're never going to taste quite the same. But passing it along is one of our legacies that we get to leave behind us for the generations that come next. Rugelach are a memory-filled dessert cookie made for generations and generations by our Ashkenazi relatives. My mother made them, and my grandmother even made them. And now I'm making them, and now I'm teaching my grandson to make them, so that the recipe and the deliciousness and the joy and the sweetness can continue.
Fucking
Love
awesome.
it. Awesome.
Sorry.